It's Talk Erie and the Joel Natale Show. We are live from our Kingdom Financial Group studio here at 5th and State, also live on Facebook and YouTube. And this is a conversation I've been wanting to have for many, many years. I want to welcome in to our studio here. We've got Patrick Cuneo, Kevin Cuneo, the Cuneo Brothers here of the famous newspaper family and Erie family here, and we're here to talk about your story, guys, and also to talk about Christmas time in Erie as you were growing up. Welcome. I appreciate you being here.
It's great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation.
All righty, so let's get started with kind of how you came up. Kevin, I'll start with you. You're the oldest. You get deference, right? So, how did you, like, what part of town did you grow up? And your dad was already in journalism. What did mom do? And talk about, like, the family itself.
Well, Pat and I were actually born when the family lived at 21st and Ash, next door to the PNA Club. And we lived there till we were 7 or 8 years old, then moved to Marvintown and lived on East 27th Street.
Boy, that's near my neighborhood,
right.
You know. Yeah, wow.
And that was a great place because in those days, that part of Marvintown, there were little shops and, clothing stores and grocery stores and, drug stores, hardware stores. And at the end of the block was the great Herman's Tavern.
Yes.
Which was a wonderful place at Christmas time every year because they used to make, what would they call them, Tom and Jerry's?
Yeah,
and,
although we didn't have too many ourselves.
But it was a really great place to grow up in those years.
And all five of you, right? All five of you kids were raised over there in Marvintown, huh?
Right.
That's back when, hey, you shared a room. This is how it goes, right?
We were in the attic.
Were you really?
Yes, the four boys. And occasionally, let's see, one time Kevin threw a shoe at me and it hit the fish tank and went all the way down 3 floors, that kind of thing. But no, we had a great neighborhood because it was a great mix of people. Had tons of kids, had older people, but a lot of families. Our next door neighbor was a longtime teacher at East High, and the woman next door on the other side was the organist at the Methodist Church. We had a great upbringing. We walked to Bakersfield and played every sport in season.
So did my kids. Wow.
Yeah. So it was really a lot of fun.
And what was grade school like? Where did you guys go for grade school?
Went to St. John's.
You did
St.
St.
John the
Wow.
Baptist.
Yeah.
Which was 2 blocks away from where we lived.
Yeah. So that whole St. John's to prep pipeline, right? I mean, that was real.
We were in the academy district, but kids from our school went to Tech Academy and prep. But it was a real interesting thing. St. John's even then had a real aggressive sports program, and I was in sports for a long time, and that affected what we actually did later. I was in sports through high school.
Wow.
And while Kevin started his writing career when we would play wiffle ball in the backyard, and he called himself Tiawaki. And he would go in after the games and make himself a star with these heroic tales.
Because I was a star.
Wiffle ball, right? Nice.
Right. It was terrible.
It sounds like an idyllic Erie childhood.
It was
really,
great.
Yeah, really great.
And did you get a sense of, like, how big of a deal your father was? Did you know that pretty much right away?
You want me to take a shot at this?
Sure.
He was our dad, first and foremost.
Sure.
But he was a big-time writer. He was the president of the Baseball Writers of America. We went to many huge games. We were regulars, going to Cleveland, occasionally to Pittsburgh. So he was a absolute fun dad.
Was he formally trained? Like,
well, he started when he was a teenager, so he,
Yeah.
And
you went to Notre Dame, you went to Vanderbilt. Like, that's legitimate journalism schooling, right? What did he come up with?
Well, he worked for he was the editor of the East High Tom Tom, and
Sure.
then he actually, when he was drafted during World War II, he worked on Stars and Stripes. So he had a lot of experience by the time he came back to the Times. And my gosh, he was a sports editor when he was 23 years old.
So they saw that writing capability right away. When I was reading some of the obituaries about your dad, they're saying he was one of the top sports journalists in the country, well recognized. I mean, this was a proven fact of how he rose.
He was a real writer of all types, and he wrote short stories. But his claim to fame was his speed. It was just blistering what he could do on an old, his touch typing. And Kevin and I came across a great story at George Deitch, when he was running the History Center, received the veterans information of where all the Erie veterans, what happened to them, what might have been documented. And he showed that our dad was on his way to the Pacific War station in Oregon, and they put the word out, can anybody type? And he went in and he knew shorthand. He was a blistering typist, and that had him stay.
And the amazing thing was that his troop, or whatever it was that he was part of, they went ahead and fought the Japanese on all those islands, and many of them were wiped out.
Wow!
So that might have saved his life.
So did he stay in Oregon or did he go?
No. Well, he stayed there.
Yeah.
He actually got sick
Okay.
at one point and had cancer, and they did surgery, and then he recovered. They were ready to send him to the final, invasion of Japan, and the war ended. The bombs were dropped and the war ended.
Yeah.
He always said the war ended because they knew he was on his way.
That's what happened similar with my dad. My dad was stateside. He was a trainer in the communications, and then they were getting ready for the invasion of Japan, and then they signed the armistice or whatever. Millions of young GIs were saved by that.
Right.
By that.
Well, years later, his speed at writing, it really was phenomenal, much faster than we ever were. That allowed him in big-time sporting events. His copy was often the ones used by UPI or AP sending out, because he just was blistering fast. Also became, very close to a lot of those writers, who in turn were close to us later on.
So you're saying that, if he was covering a national sporting event, sometimes it was his copy that made the wire.
Right.
I would say often.
Wow.
That's correct.
Often. Wow. Tell us how your parents met, because is your mom from like Wisconsin or something like that?
Yeah, boy, you know a lot about us.
I literally did an hour of research,
Yeah, you want to take this, Scott?
Sure. My mother's cousin from Wisconsin married in Conneaut, Ohio, to a sports writer from the Erie Dispatch, Tom McGuire. And at the wedding, my mother had gone to the wedding in Conneaut, and she met my father. And 3 months later, they were married.
Oh, my gosh.
And she moved to Wisconsin, to Erie, and that's where we lived all those years.
Unreal. The tell me about the idea of the writing. I mean, again, there's genetics that happen to you guys, but also it had to be, environmental, right?
I do remember vaguely the first kind of copy I would generate. My brother Michael would look it over and say, "What are you doing here?" And he would beat on me until I got it right. Kevin told a great story, or has told a great story about our dad teaching him how to write photo captions. You remember this?
Yeah. That was one of the first jobs. I started there when I was 14. And actually, Mom was out of town. She was back in Wisconsin for a week or something. And we were kids. We were practically the same age, so we were battling all the time.
Yeah.
And my dad had to go to work on a Saturday, and he said, "I'm taking you." And I thought, great. I loved going into the sports department.
Yeah.
So I got there, and I pulled out the record book and started to read. He says, "Oh, no, you're not doing that." And I'm 12 years old. And he had me writing, captions for pictures and things. And I'll never forget Bob Sutherland was the Sunday editor in those days. And he sees me and he says, "Hey, kid, go in my desk drawer and get me a pencil or something." So I open his drawer and there's a bottle of Irish whiskey there. And I thought, boy, this is the pros.
It makes me want to ask a side question of whatever happened to the Erie Press Club? That was like a legitimate place to kind of unwind after the shift, right?
Yeah, well, it was already defunct by the time we were.
Okay.
But its attraction was you have former newspaper people or current newspaper people ran it, and then Erie. Even when I started, you remember the same thing. There were 100 printers, so anybody in the media field could go, and from other media, but. That's the difference of say today, where there are no printers or there is no press room. So the actual numbers were huge, and Erie was really
It was
around.
a club town in those days too.
Yes,
and it was among it's probably its greatest population as well.
What occurs to me is that you had two rival newspapers, but they all probably both belonged to the press club. Right. That could make for some lively conversations, perhaps.
And they were many of them were close friends. They were bitter rivals on the job, but then afterwards, when they were raising a few, they were close friends.
Yeah, Jack Palance did an obituary again when your dad passed. Again, one of the most moving obituaries that was. Of the multiple obituaries that were made for your dad, 45 years old.
Yeah, he's now been gone. What 40,
50 some years.
Yeah.
The amazing thing is, when he was dead at 45, Pat and I stood in front of his casket at the Quinn Funeral Home. He's 15, I'm 16, and we said, "Well, at least he lived a good long life." Which is, in the mind of a 15 or 16-year-old, 45 was old.
Yeah. Wow.
But he was a great guy, and he in those days, like the major stars, would kind of, bend a few with the sports writers. I remember coming home from school once, and Billy Martin and Gil McDougall were sitting in our living room. And another time, I just read about this recently. My mother made dinner for Jackie Robinson when he spoke here at a banquet in 1959. And the funny thing was, in this column I just came across recently, Robinson spoke at this banquet, this local banquet, and he gave a very frank conversation about what it was like, when he was a young black man breaking in all-white Major League Baseball. And he told some very frank stories, and what was the guy's name? Frank Lane, who was the general manager of the Indians, and was incensed by this, and got up at the banquet and, tied into him, tore him apart.
Lord.
And Robinson was just very gentlemanly about it. But I mean, isn't that bizarre? It's,
if anyone's seen that. What is it, 42, the movie, and the Philadelphia manager, just totally brutal.
Right, but by that time, Robinson had been retired for 4 or 5 years.
That's right. He was a Republican.
Yeah, that's right. He was.
We're talking to Kevin and Patrick Cuneo here. We're doing some reminiscing. We're going to get into Christmas and some of the other things that the gentlemen remember from growing up on Erie's East Side here. It's a special Wednesday edition of the Joel Natale Show. Stay with us. We're doing some classic Erie reminiscing here on the Joel Natale Show with Kevin and Patrick Cuneo here, and I want to talk about you mentioned the folks who come in to Erie for like the Art Arcalian sports banquet that was held every year. Okay, so your dad, Gene Cuneo, is meeting Johnny Weissmiller, and I love this. He tells Johnny Weissmiller, "You Tarzan, me Gene." That's just classic.
I remember
He was a card, wasn't he, your dad?
Oh yeah, but Weissmiller was a great guy because my father says this kid loves your Tarzan call. I don't know if you remember it, but it was
Sure, yeah.
almost a yodel, you know.
You're right.
And he says he did, and then he does it right there, right then and there. And then we're walking up the steps, and you could hear it over and over again.
Everybody was prompting him to do that.
Right.
Oh my word! While we're on the subject of the banquets, tell us about some of the folks that you saw coming in.
Well, there was one particular banquet in 1965 that the headliner was Willie Mays and Ernie Banks, Willie Stargell, Sam McDowell. It was the lineup was unbelievable. Pete Rose.
Wow.
And this is all at the same banquet.
Yeah.
And it was just terrific. And Mays, when he got up to speak, he got overwhelmed and he starts to cry, big
Oh my
tears.
gosh.
It was amazing. It was out at the Beachcomber, and it was just one of the best memories I have.
Yeah.
Now I want to know if you guys remember when Mickey Mantle came. That didn't go over so well in Erie, PA, did it?
No, unfortunately not. He landed in Pittsburgh, and he had too much to drink all the way up to Erie, and then told a couple of foul jokes that were funny, but you know.
The papers were definitely sour on the performance, right?
Yeah.
He wasn't the only one. There were some bad actors at different times, but largely it was fascinating. And for kids,
Yeah.
it was awesome. They did autographs openly. There was no, let me sell you a photo.
Yes.
And you can get it autographed business. But we loved Bob Pridz, who was such a class act. It's so funny. And he and Sam McDowell did a skit together in one year.
They couldn't find him. The banquet was ready to start. And he says, where's McDowell and Prince? And it turned out they both had aprons on, and they were serving coffee in the back of the hall.
I mean, again, one of the things that we've learned about Erie, especially in those days, is that we played up like a major market, even though maybe the numbers on the population weren't there, but we were what they call a terminal market where, again, guys like you could be writing for your entire career for the Erie newspaper, or somebody like Lisa Adams can be a lifelong television broadcaster and so on. We don't see that much anymore. I mean, again, we still have our stalwarts, but a lot of the kids come to town, do 2 years on TV, and then they leave. Right? And it happens in the newspaper too, right? I mean,
I worked for the Daily Racing Forum for a brief time in 1978, and at the very end, I lost my job, and I'm trying to figure out what to do, where I can go. I wanted to be big time sports writer, and I had met Red Smith at one of the big races, and he had been a friend of my father's, and so I called him and I said, "Can I come and talk to you, get some advice?" He says, "Sure." So he invited me to his home in Connecticut, and I went up there, and I'm telling him all that I want to do, and I don't want to be in Erie, and he says, "Well, you know what?" He says, "Erie's a great place." He said, "I know the Meads." He'd gone to school with George Mead, which I didn't know.
Wow.
And he said, "You can do so much there." He said, "You can cover major events because your publisher is a sports fanatic. He'll send you anywhere," which he did. And he kind of convinced me to come back to Erie.
Well, and Ed wanted to go to the Super Bowl in the World Series along with the writers, right? I mean, that was amazing. I've got like 30 seconds Notre Dame and Vanderbilt, anything, I mean, did you guys do the paper there? Or, I mean, were you full in on journalism there?
Yeah, I did the paper in South Bend, but Kevin was the editor of the Vanderbilt
paper. And I also worked for the Nashville Banner, too.
You did work for the Banner. Wow, wow. We have to go to our bottom of the hour break. When we come back, I want to talk about, some of the big things that y'all did at the newspaper, and then we're going to talk about Christmas, because you covered Christmas stuff, but you also lived in Erie when the snow was blowing, and you had to pull the tree from the gas station lot to the house in Marvintown. It's Talk Erie. You've got Talk Erie on your radio, 105.9 WZTE, live from our Kingdom Financial Group studio here at 5th and State. Also live on Facebook and on YouTube. Kevin Cuneo, Patrick Cuneo are with us here. We are talking about the old times and as they came up as newspaper men, and are you even allowed to even say that? Newspaper people. And again, all throughout your careers, guys, amazing newspaper women too, right? I mean, I'm thinking Betty Peoples and so on, you know. Can I ask you about columns? Because your dad had a column. Kevin, of course, your column has been with us almost until just last couple of years, right? Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, super important. But talk about where columns are at in today's newspapers, because I feel like I'm missing reading the old George Will, you know, those amazing Washington Post columnists, and of course our beloved Pat Howard. I totally miss you know, Pat. But is that a dying art, columns?
I think not so in the major markets.
Okay.
The New York Times and the Washington Post, LA Times, they all have prolific editorial pages.
Sure.
So for commentary, the sports columns, maybe not as much. I see USA Today it still has quite a bit of sports column writing going on. But in a lot of the major markets, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, they just have such a lower profile. And there's so much less money in publishing that probably has affected it. But we always drew like a hard line between opinion and dot dash. Kevin did a great job of doing a news and notes column, and occasionally put in an opinion on this or that, but it was informative. So that's why his column is missed so much, I think, because it was a real newsy, tidbit oriented thing.
Well, and it was in the great tradition of Ed Matthews, where it was just kind of like a skimming of what he was reading in the paper, what interests him, right?
Right, exactly.
His dad wrote a daily column.
Did he?
John Meade.
Okay.
And
what was his pseudonym? J. James. Yes.
And also the Dispatch. In all the research I've done over the years, we would always hear from the Dispatch people about how horrible the Times was and how great the Dispatch. Right. You know, I've done comparisons on both. They were both solid papers.
Yeah.
All the way back. They all had political leanings, but they were clearly labeled. And they changed at times.
I was going to say, wasn't the Times the Republican paper at one point?
Yes, it was.
And the Dispatch was the Union Democrat paper. Yeah.
But vice versa at various times.
Is that right?
So you have to be on the ball when you're searching this stuff.
Well, you know, I think of all of the things that I miss about, you know, modern newspapering, I think that's the number one thing I miss, is that there was a reliable person that vetted the news and told me, you know, challenged how my thinking. I mean, you always could count on Pat Howard to kind of get you going a little bit, you know, and you know, George Will or Eugene Robinson. I mean, again, those great Washington Post columnists were part and parcel of our daily paper for years and years, until like a couple of years ago.
But actually, with the passing of Pat Howard, who was a young man when he died, sadly.
He was my age, yeah.
He held local politicians and government officials, you know, he held them to account. You know, he was, that really helped our area, I think, and we miss that now.
Yeah.
You know, I did a lot of that myself, and because there are times when a column can support a decision or fight a decision, or at least get into the public argument, what's going on, debate, but the columnist has to have real credibility, because if the columnist is spinning, what do you have here?
Right.
And that's one of the great challenges of today. If the columnists lose their credibility, then they have nothing. And this is a tough time we're in right now. This is all going to play out. A lot of people are moving to podcast work,
Right.
but is it a clean column opinion, or
Right.
is it spun?
That's interesting. Yeah. Talk about what your dad would try to do with his sports columns, because again, they really lit up, whatever he was covering generally.
They were fun.
Yeah.
Number one.
He had. He was a terrific writer, and he could be really funny. I remember he had a big column after the Jets upset the Baltimore Colts in this Super Bowl.
Sure.
And he had picked Baltimore to win by like 40 points. So he got this.
Did he not know who Joe Namath was, right?
So he runs this full page of a cartoon of him eating crow. And then there were like all these really nasty letters. And I remember this one woman just reamed him out, from top to bottom, and she signs her name, Mrs. John Glenn. And he says, you've just been sore ever since your husband went up in that space rocket.
Oh, that's hilarious. I'm bouncing around, but it's intentional here. One of the things I wanted to mention and find out from you, Kevin, is that how quickly did you come home from Vanderbilt, right? And what was your gig at the Times out of Vanderbilt? What, were you just general assignment?
I started as a police reporter.
Oh, you were a police.
And then
okay.
I got into general assignments after about 6 months or so.
At some point, though, again, that's how I interpreting the narrative is you had the idea for the Weekender, for the show. I'm sorry, the showcase,
Right.
the showcase. And how does that happen? And how do you convince the powers that be to go and do an entertainment tab like that?
Well, actually, Pat was very involved in that as well. But I had an idea. I thought that kind of a publication could have a real niche in Erie.
Did you see it in Nashville? I mean, was there
They had
an equivalent?
But at that time, like Erie had what they called a show page, which had the movies and a couple restaurant ads. But I thought, geez, this could be a lot bigger than that. And as it turned out, it was. It really.
I mean, at one point it was like 40 pages.
Oh
or
yeah,
something. I mean,
it was
gosh.
great.
Yeah. We had several deals were made in the process of creating that. It was an ad builder, and it made a lot of money. But we played off of Doug Reeder had been running the Weekender, and he became a central part of Showcase, which a name that our mom came up with.
Did she really?
And we laughed, but it somehow caught on.
What did she have some newspaper blood too?
She
worked the switchboard at the paper.
She did. And she would, no matter what we were, this keeps you humble. Whatever, if she had to take a break and there was no one around, she would call her sons to come over and relieve her on the switchboard. And she was a great lady. Wow. And so we, in other words, the development of Showcase involved several people, but Kevin deserves lion's share. He came home and worked for our front office with the Meads.
Wow.
Yeah, for a year.
For a year.
Until the publication actually appeared.
And
I went all over the country checking out products like what Showcase would become.
Yeah.
Was that tough for the pressmen, or did they figure it out pretty easily? I mean, because you're cutting it in half and all. I mean, it's a different printing process.
It was actually a broadsheet turned on its side.
Oh, okay.
So that the technical parts of that. But we had great support from people like Bob Sharples, a printer who helped us. He was a leading guy in the composing room, and he helped us develop a lot of
His grandson, his name is Nick Sorensen, and now he's a reporter.
Oh my gosh, I love Nick. He's a great guy.
So,
wow.
But there were other key decisions in that. At the very end, when we were trying to get it launched, we had all these ads running on Fridays, especially the movie ads, and they didn't want to move off of Friday and support the Thursday. Why was it Thursday? We were convinced by a great friend of ours, Bill Schlemmer, who was an editor and publisher of the Akron Beacon Journal, their paper ran Thursdays, and these were all very relatively new. But he gave Kevin and me great advice on what should go in, but it was Mike Mead who put his foot down and told the movie guys they're either in Thursday or they're not in anything.
Yeah, which was pretty gutsy.
That was an amazingly
Yeah.
tough call for a thriving newspaper at the time. But that really gave us the impetus to get started. And
Well, you think about the impact of that piece of the showcase, that it made local musicians' careers, it made local promoters' careers. You think about I think about Robin and her theater reviews were in the showcase. I mean, I got a nice review, for when I was at Gannon from the showcase, and I'm like, thank you, Robin Dial at the time, right? You think about the impact that your craft makes on people's lives. It's pretty poignant, isn't it?
yeah.
That was a lot of fun too. It really was.
Yeah.
Also, when you speak of showcase, you can't not speak of Dave Richards.
100%.
A
Dr.
guy
Rock.
we brought in who was he was a hybrid sports and entertainment guy, but his knowledge of music was just, unparalleled.
A terrific writer, just a great writer.
And we I'll tell you how bad it was in the beginning. I was the music editor. And I was a reporter,
Yes.
but I would handle the music. So one day Kevin throws me an interview. Like he said, "Hey, can you do this?" And I said, "Geez, I'm tied up, but yeah, go ahead." So I did this interview thinking it was Peggy Lee, and it was actually Brenda Lee. And I went through this, and as long as the interview's going on, she's getting madder and madder at me. And I thought, well, there was my low point, and that was the status of the music coverage. till
Oh
Dave
my
got
God,
there.
that's amazing. All right, I've got to get to Christmas time because again, you guys had to cover the snowstorms. You had to cover Christmas time. Try to describe to our folks about how big of a deal it was to come downtown for Christmas, because I just remember as a young person, you went to the Boston store. You went to, I guess it was Trask at the time, and so on. It was the destination, wasn't
And
it?
the fifth floor at the Boston store was the toy department.
100%.
And it was great. It was a lot of fun.
And what I was amazed in looking at the old newspapers is the Boston store. They would buy 10, 12 full-page ads on a Sunday paper every week. I mean, they would do a whole page on, stockings. And, it was co-op, right? I mean, they were getting half of that paid by whoever, Playtex. But, I mean, it was shocking, just shoes, just, fragrances and so on. Really astounding.
But Erie was a great place at Christmas because everybody celebrated. You had all these mom and pop corner bars that would, decorate for Christmas and serve special drinks. And, I mentioned at Herman's, they had Tom and Jerry's and, the ethnic part of Erie was in great display at Christmas time, for the Italians and the Polish and the Germans and even the Irish. It was a wonderful time.
Yeah. What kinds of foods did you guys get into?
Well, I think I was a particularly stupid young kid. But I always thought our dad never drove.
Yes.
And I always thought that spaghetti and pizza were served by the taxi company because the taxi would arrive,
Oh my God.
later we found out it was Hector's and
Wow.
or we had a great pizza joint at 21st and Parade called DeSille's.
But did you do the fishes and stuff on Christmas
Yeah.
Eve?
Yeah.
We didn't do the
no.
the whole thing, but we would celebrate with some of the fishes.
Yeah. Could you grab some headphones? I think we have a caller. I think somebody wants to weigh in. Can you grab them?
Oh,
man?
sure.
Yeah. Hey, Phil, we've got you there. The guys are getting headsets and go ahead and weigh in there, buddy.
Can I assume? I'm having so much fun. I love your programming for the over 60 set.
Yeah. Exactly.
Can I assume we're talking to the Cuneos?
Yes, it's Patrick and Kevin. Yes.
Okay. All right. I just wanted to make sure my perception was right. I have to say, I'm getting chill bumps just when you guys are talking about Showcase. What a novel thing that really was. I mean, and I look at what the paper is now, what it used to be, and how much fun it was. I remember what a big deal it was to go down and then as a teenager and go through the printing process. And remember, if you did get your name in the paper, you got the tin. I mean, all the right.
That's right.
Tin. I have a tin hanging in my studio.
Yeah.
That's
when I
awesome.
started my shop, they did a story. I'll have to send you a picture of that. But I will say, on Cuneo related, but you guys can talk about sports. Bowling was so big back then, and I was a bowling nut back in the 70s, that Frank DeSantis used to write a whole column on Sundays. It took up like half a page in the Sunday paper called Frankie's Lane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And he covered all the bowling news. It was like a gossip sheet for bowlers. And one time, because I was working at Lakewood Lanes, which was later became Presque Isle Lanes, and they had a tournament there, and it was one of those tournaments where they were going to go to one place, and then maybe the second week would be at Eastland. Well, Lakewood Lanes was not known for being one of the easier establishments in town, so Frankie goes ahead and writes a column like, word on the grapevine is a lot of the bowlers weren't too happy with the setup over at Papa Christos' place.
That's
Frankie,
awesome.
Frankie walked into Lakewood Lanes like 6 months later. Those two almost got in a fist fight.
That's
so
fantastic.
no, I'm enjoying the show immensely. Thanks.
Thank you,
Thank
Bill.
you.
We'll take it easy.
Bye.
Bye. I mean, again, the intersections of life in neighborhoods. I love how you mentioned the concept of that the little corner bars. And again, in Little Italy, we had corner bars and we had corner grocery stores, right? And just that's where you gravitated to. That's where a community was made, of course, and the Catholic churches. You guys went to St. John's, I went to St. Paul's, and very, 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 very community oriented. What's a transferable value that we can bring to our grandchildren now about those times of where you knew your friends in your neighborhood, that week between Christmas and New Year's was a blast because whether you had snow and you're making snow forts and so on, or you're playing football in the snow and so on. Talk about what's still transferable, you think, guys?
I think there's still great value on the diversity of neighborhoods, and it's tougher and tougher with higher rental units and many other issues that are apparent. But Erie, at some point, I think will become serious about really working harder on its neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. I pick up from the Academy neighborhood group that is not too far from the Jefferson.
Yeah.
They're very active, and you need neighborhoods of diverse. This is what makes a city really work. Now, I think it's interesting that in the last 10 years, maybe 15 years, those neighborhoods that had fallen so bad, like Marvintown, have made a bit of a comeback.
Yeah.
And but there's a long way to go on all of these pocket neighborhoods and the housing.
Right.
And but I think that does transfer to, until you can have real diversity in your neighborhoods, you can't get back what was a diverse, naturally occurring neighborhood.
Well, my wife and I bought a house in Mill Creek when we were married, maybe 4 or 5 years, and we had three boys right in a row, and we tried. And unfortunately, our neighborhood was mostly old timers at that point. Now it's young people. There are tons of young people around, but we had to make a big effort to take those kids everywhere to meet other kids.
Sure.
And it worked. I think it really worked. That's what you have to do, I think. So the kids can have a feel for what it was like when we were kids.
Can we spend the last minute and talk about how much of a hero your mother was? losing her husband at 45 years old and raising you guys. You were successful. You went through pain. You went through loss. Yet here you are with the legacy that continues.
Oh, well, that's awfully nice of you to mention that. I could just say this. First of all, she had it really rough. She had her dad was hit by a car and died on their way home, and had pulled off to the side of the road, and a legally blind guy clipped him. And so she went through that, the death of her husband, the death of her oldest son, and was
She
still
lost a baby full term.
Yeah, it was remarkable what she had been through and the challenges she
But
faced.
she never had a bit of bitterness. Never.
No.
She was always, forging ahead. She was a woman of great faith, great sense of humor, real demanding. I mean, she used to insist that we give her gifts on Father's Day, because she was mother and father to us. And I thought
Good
it was
for her.
I thought it was a joke, but it was no joke.
Yeah.
I came home from quote unquote Christmas caroling with a bunch of friends when I was in high school, and my grandmother came to the door and looked at me and shook her head. Then my mother came to the door and punched me in the stomach. And I had a chuckle. But here's what our mom did that is unbelievable for a legacy, I think. She went to, first of all, Kevin was a very, very talented writer, but she went to all my dad's sports writing friends, big time guys, Red Smith, Joe Falls, Dick Young from New York, and got their support when Kevin applied for the best young writing.
Wow.
She got me
Kid
a free
in
ride
country.
to Vanderbilt.
4 years
The
free
Grantland
ride.
race, which was amazing. In those days, we didn't have the money to,
Sure.
to spend $35,000 to send somebody to college.
Yeah.
But
Then when it came to me going to school the next year, she had lined up. Red Smith was a Notre Dame alum. He wrote me a nice letter. Anything she could do to muster the support of for her boys, she did. And so that we're forever grateful to what she did and the sacrifices she made.
Name her name again.
Patricia.
That's right.
Yeah.
You're named after
Yeah.
her.
Yeah.
Patricia. Thank you so much, Kevin Cuneo, Patrick Cuneo. God bless you guys.
Thanks,
Merry
Joel.
Christmas.
Yeah,
Thank
thanks,
you.
Joel. This is wonderful.